The two biggest laptops of 2020 so far are easily these two sitting in front of me here, the brand new MacBook Air and the new XPS 13, both of which come with new features and new designs, and you might be wondering which is the better option for you. Well, I have spent a number of weeks with both of these laptops, switching off between the two of them as my daily driver, and I have a lot of thoughts about which one I prefer. So here's everything you need to know about how these two laptops stack up. The first thing we need to get out of the way is that the XPS 13 and the MacBook Air are both premium laptops. And that means neither really represent the best value for the components that you're getting inside. Instead, they package those parts in excellent build quality and world-class design. Now, I do prefer the kind of stark white look of the XPS 13 and of course those really thin bezels, but I am not at all gonna say that the MacBook Air isn't a looker as well. That full unibody aluminum build really hasn't aged all that poorly, and even though this isn't a design that's changed much over the past few years, there's a reason for that. It's still really pretty, especially in this gold colorway, which you can only get on the MacBook Air. The second thing that we really need to address between the two of these laptops is the price. The MacBook Air is the cheaper laptop just straight away, and that's a little bit weird if you're used to the MacBook being the kind of premium brand. But honestly, XPS has come up over the past few years and really earned its spot as a premium expensive laptop. So let's really break down how these two compare in terms of price, because the MacBook Air starts at just $999 or $899 for the education discount. The XPS 13 did at one point come in a Core i3 $999 variant, but it only came with 4 GB of RAM and a 128 GB SSD, and it's not currently available. But even if it does come back at some point, the $999 MacBook Air comes with twice the storage and twice the memory. So you're getting a really good value there for that entry point price. Beyond just the pure specs, you're also getting a really great high resolution display that comes in every configuration of the MacBook Air. It's 2560 by 1600, which offers a pixel density that no other 13-inch laptop at this price can really offer, and that includes the XPS 13. Now, I'm not saying anything bad about the XPS 13's display because it really is a good one. It's 1920 by 1200 pixel resolution, and it's a really bright and colorful screen. It's every bit as accurate as the MacBook Air. It's just not quite as sharp. Now, the other thing you get with every single configuration of the MacBook Air are these really great speakers that are located right here on the keyboard deck. There's really no comparison between the audio solutions of these two laptops. The MacBook Air offers a really full-bodied audio profile, at least for a laptop, and you even get some bass in there for music or for watching movies or anything like that. The XPS 13, on the other hand, is probably no better than the speakers on your smartphone, and they don't exactly point at your face, so there's really nothing good to say about the XPS 13 speakers. Now at this point you might be wondering, okay, the MacBook Air sounds like a pretty good deal. You're getting access to the screen and the nice speakers at that low price point. All true. But once you start configuring up the XPS 13, it really starts to shine. It can be upgraded with up to 32 GB of RAM and 2 TB of SSD storage. And of course, you can upgrade to a 4K touch display. Now, in terms of price, you can spend even more than that on the MacBook Air. You can spend up to $2,249 if you really want to, but it's diminishing returns in terms of performance and some of those features that you get. Look, when it comes down to it, the XPS 13 is just a much faster laptop, and that becomes apparent when you start to look at the price point at which these two laptops start to intersect. Because remember, the MacBook Air really does own that lower space, around $1,000, but once you jump up to about $1,200, the XPS 13 offers a much better laptop experience, at least in terms of performance, because you're getting a quad-core Core i5 Intel Ice Lake processor, that's 10th generation, with 8 GB of RAM and a 256 GB SSD. So while this screen might not be as pixel dense, it's taking a huge leap forward in terms of performance. Now, I said this in my review, but the XPS 13 is one of the fastest 13-inch laptops I've ever tested, and that's in terms of just raw single-core performance, which is a really rare thing to see in a laptop this small. If you spec it up to one of the top-tier configurations like I have, the Core i7 with 16 GB of RAM, it completely outperforms even the MacBook Pro. But wait, the MacBook Air also has an option for a quad-core Core i5 Tensor processor, right? That was the big deal with this spec update in 2020 from Apple. Well, yes, that's technically true. For $1,100, that's just $100 more, you can bump it up to a quad-core Core i5 processor, but it's really nowhere near the type of processor you're getting from the XPS 13. With only 9 watts of power draw, this is really in a completely different league of processor compared to the 15-watt U-series processor in the XPS 13. And I know that can get kind of confusing because it doesn't label it as a Y-series processor like previous MacBook Airs do, and that's kind of an Intel thing. So confusing, yes. But just to make it very clear, the XPS 13 is a much more powerful laptop despite having similar looking specs. But the real question is, will you actually notice the difference in terms of performance? Well, if your daily activities consist of Slack and Google Chrome and YouTube and Spotify and maybe a few other apps, probably not actually. Even the Core i3 MacBook Air does really well in terms of multitasking despite having just 2 cores. So you're not gonna be worried about stuttering or anything like that if you're gonna load up a bunch of Google Chrome tabs and a bunch of different applications. You're not gonna see any hiccups in terms of performance. As I said in my review, you can even load up GarageBand or iMovie and do some light content creation on the side, just to make sure you stick with Apple's apps there, because you don't wanna get into the Adobe side of things. So if you are a photographer, for example, or somebody who just wants to be an extreme multitasker, maybe you want to use your laptop as kind of a workstation with a couple of 4K monitors, that's really where you're going to see the difference in that performance headroom with the XPS 13. And despite all that power that the XPS 13 has, it remains the go-to choice for a laptop that you want to travel with. That is, when we start traveling again. It's thinner and lighter than the MacBook Air, and because of those thinner bezels around the screen, it actually has a smaller footprint as well. So if you've got the laptop on your lap or maybe on a tray table or sliding it into your backpack, it's gonna be more convenient in all those situations, and you're gonna be happy that you have something as small as the XPS 13. Beyond just the size, you'll also get a few extra hours of battery life on a single charge. So on your hypothetical work trip that you might go on in the future, you can squeeze in a few extra hours of work on your plane ride. There is a caveat there though. The MacBook Air's battery life is consistent across all the configurations, and that can't be said of the XPS 13 because of the 4K upgrade that you can go for. That higher resolution will drop you down a few more hours, and actually the 4K XPS 13 and the MacBook Air are pretty even in terms of battery life. It's just something to consider when you're actually judging these configurations side by side. And then there's the ecosystem to consider, which people don't really talk about very often, but is actually one of the main reasons why people choose one laptop over another. And here, it's very clear. We've got a Windows machine and a Mac machine. And you already are probably in one camp or the other in terms of what you prefer, but let's think a little broadly here, because when you're talking about Apple products and the Apple Watch, the iPhone, the AirPods, and a Mac, there's no question that these products really exist in the same ecosystem and they play off each other really well. Having iMessage, iCloud, and AirDrop on all the same devices is really, really convenient. You can sort of hack together something with Windows and Android or Windows and iOS, but it works nowhere near as well. There's no question that living inside of Apple's little bubble is a nice world to live in. And when you buy a MacBook Air, it of course comes with a suite of Office type applications that come from Apple. And even though these are not preferred to Microsoft Office stuff by most people, it does come free and it gets updated all the time, completely free. And the same can't be said of the XPS 13. You're gonna have to pay extra to bundle in an Office subscription. And then we have to talk about apps. Now, neither the Mac App Store or the Microsoft Store are gonna knock your socks off right now, but I do think because of Mac Catalyst and some of the developments we're seeing in the future of the Mac platform, I do think there's a little more promise kind of baked into the purchase of the MacBook Air right now. I'm not totally sold on those iPad apps coming to the Mac yet, but at least there's some movement there. And I think a couple years down the line, this MacBook Air might turn out to have a pretty rich third-party ecosystem in the Mac App Store. Of course, there are some actual distinctive features that come with these two laptops based on their operating system. For example, the XPS 13 has not only a fingerprint scanner, but also an IR camera, above the display for completely hands-free Windows Hello facial recognition logins. It's great. It also comes with a touch screen, which is something that you can't get on a MacBook still. But then on the Mac side of things, you get those really great trackpad gestures that I still think Windows kind of fumbles with. There's a number of things I haven't covered with these two laptops, and it's because they're both really good at them. For example, the keyboard and the touchpad. Both are the absolute best you can get on a laptop, representing their different sides of the spectrum. If I had to choose just from a pure typing experience, I think I would go with the MacBook Air just because you get a little bit more space in the wrist rest. Again, you're paying for that with those bigger bezels, but it does make for a slightly more comfortable typing experience. So which of these laptops should you buy? Let's think about it this way. If you're looking at that $999 price point of that entry-level MacBook Air, you're thinking that is the sweet spot for how much I want to spend or can spend on my next laptop, or even at that $899 price point if you're a student, this is a really good laptop for that price, especially when you throw in things like the awesome display, the great touchpad, and of course the awesome speakers. Those are high quality components that you normally don't see at a laptop this cheap. And in this comparison, you really can't get a $999 version of the XPS 13. However, I think the XPS 13 really is the better option for every configuration that it actually sells in, because like I said, that $999 version isn't currently available. And the reason primarily is because the more money you put into the XPS 13, the more you're gonna see actual payoff from that investment, whether that's in terms of performance or even the display, because you can jump up to 4K, and that might be the perfect option if you're a photographer or love to watch movies on your laptop. The XPS 13 really does fare better the higher up you go, and I recommend it over the 13-inch MacBook Pro at this point because that thing is pretty outdated. Although word on the street is we are gonna see a update to that very soon, maybe as early as this May. And there's a rumored 14-inch MacBook Pro that could also be coming with slimmer bezels, bigger screen, new keyboard, all that good stuff. So that might change up the lineup and the comparison of the XPS versus MacBook. But as of now, the XPS 13 really is the better option for the configurations it sells for. There's a reason why I still call it the best laptop you can buy.